By noon, the dragon filled the house. Its head hung out the front door. Its tail hung out the back door. And there wasn't a room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. I bet that there's a house like that on, some of you will live, where there's a lot of houses. Some of you live in apartments. Doesn't really matter. But I bet you if you live in a house, on a block of houses, there's at least one house on that street where the tail of the dragon has started to come out of the house. And you know what that's like, because it's the house that you don't really want to look at when you walk by. And maybe, I don't know, that needs a new roof, and like the door's a little bit crooked, and the lawn isn't cut, and there's some rusty things lying around there, and like it's just not taken care of. And and maybe you know from the gossip in the neighborhood too, that there's something going on in that house that is just not good. And it's got to the point where it's so not good that it's starting to spread itself out beyond the domestic confines of the house. So, you run into people like that now and then too. You'll notice this. So, sometimes, I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but it's happened to you in some ways. You know that there are those people who can't not tell you everything about what's going on in their life, even if you've hardly even met them. If you see someone who's really in trouble, you'll sit on the bus and somebody who's clearly on the road to being thoroughly deranged will sit down beside you, and they'll start telling you about the problems of their life. It's like that the dragon that they're dealing with is so big that they can't even contain it. They're so desperate to have it dealt with that they can't not talk about it. And there's lots of people like that. And they're the ones, what is that stupid little phrase? TMI, is that right? Too much information? It's like, yeah, well, why does that happen? It's because people are dealing with anomalies and unexpected occurrences and tragedies, and they cannot articulate a solution. And most people think by talking, which is also part of the reason that therapy works. It's right, well, do you think? I doubt it. You might, but very few people think. And so if you want to solve a problem, you want to talk it over with a friend. And so, you might just think that you're talking about the problem. Sort of, what the problem is, but you're talking about it. So you don't. When you talk about it, you articulate the problem space. You start to generate potential hypotheses about solutions. But more than that, if you're talking to someone, you can watch them, just like the little kid with the mouse would watch the mother. It's like, well, here's what I think the problem is. And if you go, you're listening and you go like that, you roll your eyes, it's a hint to the person that maybe that's not the most appropriate way to formulate the problem. Now, maybe you don't roll your eyes, but, you don't encourage them. Or maybe they tell you what the problem is and you're really actively engaged and you're nodding. Well, then they know that maybe they formulated it the way someone half sane and tolerable would formulate it. And then they can walk through the solution. So when you sit down beside someone and they have to tell you everything, one of the things that you know is that they don't have anyone to listen to them. And part of what happens in therapy, and a huge part of it, is that you just listen. I have one client, that's all I ever do with her. She comes in once every 2 weeks, and I just sit there and listen to her for an hour. And now I can maybe have a bit of a discussion with her for the last 10 minutes. But if I try to say anything for the first 50 minutes, she just looks kind of irritated, and it's like I've interrupted the flow of the interaction. And she's alone. She doesn't have anybody to talk to. So, she wants to listen to herself think. And she can't do that by herself. She has to have someone to do it with. And so, people think by talking, and some people have no one to talk to. And so their problems start to spill out. And, by that time, you can't even help them usually, because if you listen for 3 years, it wouldn't be enough listening. You just listen forever, and you never get to the bottom of it. He wrote these books, notebooks that haven't been published yet, called the Black Books. And the Black Books are the documentation of his experiments with his imagination. And what he would do is daydream, like a child daydreams. He regained that faculty, although I think with Jung it was a faculty that had never really disappeared. And he had figures of imagination that came to him that he could speak with. And he spoke with these figures of imagination and documented that over a very long period of time. And that was eventually distilled into a book called The Red Book, which was published about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was a book that Jung regarded as the central source from which all his inspiration emerged.
It was sort of, the way it looks to me is that we embody a lot of information in our action, right? And our action has developed as a consequence of imitating other people. And not only the people around us, but of course the people around us imitated the people who came before them, and those people imitated the people who came before them, and so on, so far back that it's as far back as you can go. And so you embody these patterns of behavior that are extremely informative, that you don't understand, that are a consequence of collective imitation across the centuries. And so then those patterns can become manifest as figures of the imagination. And those figures of imagination are the distillations of patterns of behavior. And so as the distillations of patterns of behavior, they have content. And it's not you, that content. You could even think about it as content that's evolved, although it's culturally transmitted. It's content that's evolved. And so these figures of the imagination can reveal the structure of reality to you. And that's what happened with Jung, and that's what he described in the Red Book, and that was what permeated his psychology, a psychology that was based on the presupposition that the fundamental archetypal structures of religious belief were not pathological, not deceitful, not protective in some delusional sense against the fear of death, but quite the contrary. The very stories that enabled us to move forward as confident human beings in the face of chaos itself. And it's conceivable, I think perhaps probable, that nothing more important conceptually happened in the 20th century than that. Because it was the first time post-Enlightenment that a rapprochement between the intellect and the underlying religious archetypal substructure occurred. You have in the capacious intellect of Jung, and the same thing happened to some degree with Piaget, the religious domain and the factual domain were brought back together. And the fact of Jung's enduring and increasing popularity and influence, I would say, is a direct consequence of that. Now, some of his work was spun off into the New Age, and the New Age is a very optimistic and naive movement. It's predicated on the idea that you can do nothing, say, but follow your bliss, and that will take you ever higher to enlightenment, and that's not the Jungian idea at all. The Jungian idea is that what you most need will be found where you least want to look. So there's this story, King Arthur, there's this story of King Arthur, they're all in a round table, right? King Arthur and his knights, they're all equals, they're all superordinate, but they're all equals. And they go off to look for the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail is the container of the redemptive substance, whatever that is. It might be the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper, or it might be a chalice that was used to capture his blood on the cross, right, when he was pierced by a sword. The stories differ, but that's the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is lost. That's the redemptive substance, and the knights of King Arthur go off to search for the Holy Grail, but they don't know where to look. So where do you look when you don't know where to look for something you need desperately but have lost? Well, each of the knights goes into the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's Jungian psychoanalysis in a nutshell. It's like that which you fear and avoid, that which you hold in contempt, that which disgusts you and that you avoid. That's the gateway to what you need to know. There's nothing New Age about that. That's for sure. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. That's interesting. So what's the implication? Prior to being woken up, prior to recognizing nakedness and vulnerability, there was no reason for man and woman to hide from God. Now are they hiding from God? Well, they're naked. They're vulnerable. Okay, so think about this. Think about this. It's like, imagine that you have the capacity to live truthfully and courageously and forthrightly. Just imagine that. And then imagine why you might not do that. And then imagine, well, how about fear and shame? How would that work? Well, let's say that the idea of living forthrightly and truthfully and courageously is analogous, given what we already know about these stories, to walking with God in the garden. Well, what stops people from doing that? What stops people from hiding? Well, it's a recognition of their own inadequacy. They look at themselves and they think, how in the world is a creature such as I supposed to live properly in this world with everything that's wrong with me? And so what do you hide from? Well, you go home, you sit on your bed for 5 minutes and ask yourself, what have you hidden from in your life? Man, you'll have books of knowledge reveal themselves to you in your imagination, right? You say, well, why are you hiding? Well, it's no bloody wonder you're hiding. It's no wonder that people hide. That's the thing that's so terrifying about this story. We woke up and we thought, oh my God, look at this place. Like, this is seriously, there's some serious trouble here, and we're in some serious trouble, and we're not what we could be. And so we hide. And that's what the story says. People woke up, they became self-conscious, they recognized their own vulnerability, and that made them hide from manifesting their divine destiny. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. And the Lord God, I love this part of the story, and that's so funny. And the Lord God called, and we could use a little humor at this point. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, where art thou? And Adam said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked. So in case there was any doubt about that, that's why. And I hid myself. And God said, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat of the tree whereof I commanded you that you should not eat? And this is where Adam shows himself in all his post-fall heroic glory. And the man said, the woman. Whom thou gavest to be with me. She gave me of the tree and I did eat. So that's such, man, that's such, that it's so, you know, again, there's a modern feminist interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve that makes the claim that Eve was portrayed as the universal bad guy of humanity for disobeying God and eating the apple. It's like, fair enough, you know, looks like she slipped up. And then she tempted her husband, and, you know, that makes her even worse, although was foolish enough to immediately eat, so it just means she was a little more courageous than him, and got there first. But it's Adam who comes across as really one sad creature in this story, as far as I'm concerned. Look at what he manages in one sentence. It's like, first of all, it wasn't him, it was the woman. And second, he even blames God. It's like, it wasn't just the woman, it was that woman, and you gave her to me. And she gave me of the tree and I did eat. It's like, so, hey, Adam's all innocent, except now he's, not only is he naked and disobedient and cowardly and ashamed, he's also snivelly, backbiting, fink. He rats her out like the second he gets the opportunity, and then he blames God. It's like, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right, man. You go online and you read the commentary that men write about women when they're resentful and bitter about women. You read it, it's so interesting. It's like, it's not me, it's those bitches. Okay? That's right, it's not me, it's them. And not only that, what a bloody world this is in which they exist. It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And it is absolutely pathetic. It's the willingness to act as if the world is constructed so that if you do the right thing, the best possible outcome will occur. It's a decision. That's the covenant, right? It's a decision about how to live in the world, because the evidence can't be there before you make the decision, right? And so you might hedge your bets. You know, when Christ comes back in the book of Revelation to judge people, because he comes back as a judge, and virtually everyone gets cast out with the chaff and not saved with the wheat. He says something very interesting. He appears in the vision with a sword coming out of his mouth. It's a horrifying vision. And he divides he divides humanity into the damned and the saved, or the damned and the saved. He says something very interesting. He says, to those who were neither hot nor cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. And it's a disgust metaphor, right? And what it says is that the worst punishment isn't waiting for those who committed to something and did wrong. The worst punishment is reserved for those who committed to nothing and stayed on the fence. And that's really something too. That's really something to think about. And it's also something I believe to be true, because I see that stasis is utterly destructive. Because there's no progress, all there is movement backwards. There's aging and suffering and no progress. And so to not commit to anything is the worst of all transgressions. To commit means to put your body and soul into something. To offer your life as a sacrifice means that you're willing to make a bargain with fate. And the bargain is, I'm going to act as if I give it my all, then the best possible thing will happen because of that. And to not see the analogy between that and the act of faith in God is to misunderstand the story completely. And it has to be an act of faith, because how are you going to know? You can look at other people, but that isn't going to do it. Kierkegaard was very clear about this sort of thing. There's certain sorts of truths that you can only learn for yourself through experience. And that's, of course, why Abram also has to go out alone, right? He has to leave his kin. It's an individual, it's the individuation process. Like dying, it's something that you do alone. There's no way you can tell what is within your grasp, let's say, unless you make the ultimate sacrifice. And there's no way of finding out without actually making it. And so that's the sacrificial act, right? That's re-emphasized in the act of Abram being called upon to sacrifice Isaac. You think about that. It's Abram. He's been like breaking himself into pieces, trying to progress forward through starvation and tyranny and war and deceit and the potential loss of his wife and childlessness and like everything that can really befall you in some sense. And finally, God grants him Isaac when he's old. It's impossible. He gets Isaac, his son. And then what does God do next? Is say, well, you know that son that you've been waiting for so long? It's like, I'd like to see just exactly what you're made of, so I think you should offer him up as a sacrifice. And I mean, it's a very barbaric story in a sense, and maybe in more than just a sense. But Abraham does maintain his covenant. He's willing to make the sacrifice. He's willing to make, this is the thing, he's willing to make whatever sacrifice is necessary to keep his covenant with God intact. And that's that. I'm unwilling to deny the existence of free choice merely because I don't understand it. Because it looks to me like that's how people act, that's how they expect to be treated, and that societies that structure themselves in accordance with the idea that people have free choice actually work. Now that doesn't prove that there's free choice, but people have been arguing about that forever. But it looks to me, so those are two possible means of integration, and then I think what you're doing is feeding one or the other constantly. And I think you probably choose which one to feed. I think. That's how it feels that way to me as well. Like when I look at my own, maybe you're really aggravated with something. Maybe you're aggravated with your wife, or your child or something like that, and you're feeling kind of nasty, and maybe you even know that you're in the wrong. And an idea comes into your head. You think, I could say that. And you could say it, and you know what it would do. But then you pause and you think, would that make it better or worse? And then maybe you go to hell with it, which is quite the thing to say. I've got a little story about that in a minute. And then you say it, but you knew that you took the low road, right? And you know it. And then you're guilty about that and defensive, and that makes the fight way worse, because then there's no damn way you're going to admit that you actually did that. And so things do go to hell. And so here's an ugly little idea. So that's relevant to the question. So imagine you're playing around with cocaine. Now, I'm using cocaine because it's very addictive, but it's a very interesting chemical because it's a dopaminergic agonist. And what dopamine does is two things. It makes you feel like what you're doing is worthwhile, but it also, imagine that there's a bunch of neural circuits that are active, and then they get a hit of dopamine, or you do. Then those neural circuits get a little bit more powerful. Okay, so it has a rewarding property, which is that it makes you feel like what you're doing is important, and it has a reinforcing property, which is it makes neural circuits grow. So now what that means is that whatever you were doing just before you took cocaine grows. Okay, so now imagine there's a bunch of different things that you do just before you take cocaine, but there's a string of decisions, and at one decision point is the same for all of those different occurrences, and that decision point is, because you know you're in trouble, and that decision point is, well, to hell with it. Okay, so then you think that each of the 200 times that you take cocaine, even though you do it in different places, but that one thought is there all the time, and that thing grows because you're reinforcing it, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And so now that's in you, that's part of you, and it's the thing that says to hell with it. Okay, so now, and maybe that's not such a good thing to grow inside your brain. So then you're addicted, and they take you to a cocaine treatment center, and after a week you're no longer physiologically addicted. You're not craving, you don't have a problem, as long as you're there. But then they take you back to your normal environment, and you see, like, Cocaine Joe, your friend, and as soon as you see him, up that thing comes, and bang, you're back on the to hell with it track. And that's where you will end up too, if you reinforce that particular perspective long enough. So that's akin in a sense to this decision-making process. You know, if you take the low road, then that wins, and it gets a little stronger. Because everything that wins neurologically gets a little stronger. It's like a Darwinian competition. So one rule is don't practice what you don't want to become, because you really do become that. It builds itself right into your neural architecture. And that's one of the terrifying things about addiction, you know, because you think, well, it's kind of psychological. It's like, yeah, kind of. It's also kind of neurophysiological, and you build a one-eyed cocaine monster in your head if you hit yourself enough with something that reinforcing. So